Chapter 8. The blue team had waited for her to get to the tower and then hurried off for their next challenge. Divya gave each of them a turquoise ribbon and handed them a map to reach their day's final challenge. She was tired, and though she knew she should be absorbing some of the kind things the others were saying, she couldn't let go of the fact that she had put height before age. She felt stupid, as it was obvious, and she could have had everyone across without any lost pegs. She and Callady were in the back again. The tall boy dropped back to congratulate her. "You did a great job back there." She tried to smile convincingly, but felt insincere as she said, "Thank you. I guess I got lucky." Perplexed, the boy tried again. "You were the only one with 4 pegs left, and you had to make all the decisions yourself." Callady could tell something was wrong and that he wasn't helping. "Thank you, Tide. That was very thoughtful of you." He nodded his head and ran up to the others. Tall Tide, that's his name. Everyone was so nice to each other and always seemed so happy. She didn't know why it was so annoying, but it was. It wasn't like she wanted to be unhappy or for them to be unhappy. It was just weird. "It must be hard not knowing everyone," Callady spoke first. She didn't know why Callady said that, but it had nothing to do with how she felt. "No, not really," she responded. She preferred it that way. "It would be hard for me. I imagine I would feel left out and odd." She would prefer to be left out, so she wouldn't feel as awkward, and she knew she was odd. "Not for me," she replied, knowing her voice sounded unnatural. "Well, I'm glad then, because we are glad you are on our team," Callady said, lacing her arms into hers. Fighting the urge to pull her arm away, she forced a smile. "The map said we have a 2-mile walk. We should sing," Callady proposed. "I don't know many songs," which was partly true. "You must know Khaled's call." Covering quickly, she said, "My family didn't sing," which was true. "Okay, I will sing it, and then I'm sure it will come to you." Trying to stall, she asked, "How did you learn it?" "Odie taught me." "You knew Odie? I thought he died a long time ago." "I'm sure 4 years is a very long time for Aneth." Thinking of Aneth, she realized she needed to figure out how not to be an outsider. "What was Odie like?" she asked curiously. "Wonderful. Some younger kids feared him, but he always found a way to be their friend." "Why were they scared of him?" Callady looked at her before answering. "Because of all the burns on his face and hands." "How sad. How did he get burned?" "Didn't Anna tell you about him?" "Yeah, she did, but not about burns." Callady nodded her head understandingly. "What did she tell you?" Pausing to think, she said, "She told me he was very kind, that he loved lavender tea, that he loved to sing, and came from a family of singers. All very true things." "But how did he get burned?" "No one knows for sure. They were the only 2 who came home from the inner circle that year, and that was a long, long time ago." "What do you know about the inner circle?" "Not very much. Most people don't go that far." "Did any of your other siblings go to the inner circle?" "No, but my sister's sweetheart Joseph and 2 friends did. They came back, but Joseph didn't." "Did your sister say why she didn't go to the inner circle?" "No. Most people don't talk about it, and I guess we all just don't ask." She wondered if she had asked something she shouldn't have. "Is the full moon a week?" "Yes." "So we started at the covering. The first day we had the meadow and the binding. Today is the second day, so 5 more days." "Yes." "You said each group had 12 people, right?" "Yes." "Why do some go to the meadow and binding, but not the venture?" "I'm not sure. My uncle didn't go on the venture, but he did go to the meadow and binding." Did he regret not going? I don't think so. The meadow and binding had been hard, but she knew she would regret not continuing. Curious, she looked closer at Calliope's cloak. Why did you choose your cloak? I love yellow, and it seemed so happy a shade it was easy to pick. She was mindful of her dark gray cloak. Calliope laughed her easy, melodious laugh. Gray is a refined color. Once you had your cloak, how long did it take you to figure out what to do next? No one is supposed to give advice about the meadow or binding, but I overheard my brothers teasing each other once, so I knew time was funny in the meadow and I needed to clear my mind quickly. What was the light that was swirling around everyone? Calliope looked confused. I didn't see any light. They were catching up to the others who had stopped walking. Tide told them it was a small water crossing and would only take a few minutes. Sitting on the ground, she pondered the next question to ask. She didn't want to ask anything specific that could be turned and asked of her, so she simply asked, What did you think of the binding? I loved it, Calliope explained. When I realized how perfect my sun clasp was for me, I knew it couldn't be a coincidence. Like your butterfly and Roan's arrow, everything suits us perfectly. She felt too vulnerable to ask why Calliope thought the butterfly fit her, but she was pleased she thought it did. What did you think of the binding? Calliope asked excitedly. Considering what word to choose, she hastily chose enlightening. Calliope agreed readily and asked, What part did you find the most enlightening? She wanted to say the binding, but it was too raw, so she said, The sorting. I absolutely loved that part. When the white light shimmered all over me, it reminded me of the sun when it hits the water just right. It was transcendent. She was grateful Tide had come to offer to help them up because she was so confused. Crossing the creek was easy. She was used to walking across fence poles as one of her exercises, so the dropped log had been no trouble. She was surprised to see the team's faces as she jumped down on the other side. What? She asked self-consciously. Nothing, Roan laughed. You just crossed that so much faster than anyone else. Looking back, she was surprised to see Calliope slowly inching along the log, arms stretched out to help her balance. When Calliope reached the other side, she announced, Next time, I am going before Tilly does. Everyone laughed as they waited for Tide to cross. Yelling from the log, Tide said, And I am going before Calliope. There it was again, that camaraderie and ease she did not understand. Page break. The sky was beautiful shades of pink and orange as they arrived at their campsite. The hike had been easier than expected, and she was annoyed by its simplicity. What was wrong with her? She thought she had already learned the lesson of not being prideful. Approaching the fire ring, they sat on the logs that awaited them. Trying to look as pleasant as those around her, she inwardly seethed. All the happy people were hard to be around. She wanted to be alone to think. She did not like how she felt and needed time to figure out why she was so upset. Roan was reading the directions, which annoyed her. Why was he always taking charge? She had heard none of the directions when Tide volunteered her to lead the challenge. She did such a great job at the bridge that I think she should be the leader on this challenge. That would be great, Tilly. Would you mind? Roan asked, offering the directions to her. She did not want to admit she had not been paying attention and did not want the stress of being in charge. She muttered, No, thank you. Tide was persistent. Come on, Tilly. You would be really good at this, and we can help you. Some of her anger threatened to leak out, but she quickly suppressed it and replied firmly, No, thank you. I prefer to watch. Tide was about to continue when Larsh and Harma volunteered to lead. Relieved, she went back to sulking. She hardly noticed Calliope asking her for her colored ribbons from the day and mutely gave them to her. A fire had been made, and she numbly watched it flicker and come to life. Everyone was attentively listening to Harma as she read the directions. Roan was letting them give their interpretations of the directions, but she could tell he did not agree with them. Coward, she thought, as she looked away to see the darkening sky. An explosion of color came from the fire, bringing her to her feet. Everyone was talking at once, trying to figure out what had gone wrong. Tide came quickly to her side. "Please help us, Tilly. We just wasted one of our turns to get this right." She wasn't sure why this annoyed her more. She did not want to help, and she did not like the pressure that Tide was putting on her. Hal was braiding one of each of the ribbons, and before waiting for approval, tossed the braid into the fire. Stepping back, expecting another explosion, she was surprised to see the fire immediately snuffed out. Tide left her to rejoin the group, who had started talking excitedly over each other. She sat back down, grateful to be alone. Callady and Grade had relit the fire, and Roan had his back to it, as if trying to prevent another person from going rogue with their idea. She smirked at the situation. Somehow, knowing others were now chaotic made her feel less chaotic. But with that realization, she knew it wasn't true. She was not happy when they were happy, and she was not happy when they were chaotic. Why was she so unhappy? The answer surprised her. Either way, she felt on the outside. That couldn't be it. She was choosing not to participate because she didn't want to. She felt the wrongness of it, even as she tried to make it true. She had never been around a lot of people, nor had she wanted to. As an only child, she knew how to be alone. She enjoyed being alone. She knew this also was not true. Well, it is better to be alone than to risk disappointing people. The point was poignant, and with it flooded many memories of times she had tried to please Paleth or her father so she wouldn't be so alone. Quick, angry tears came up as she pushed away any parallel between then and now. This was stupid. She was not a child. Aneth's words came back to her. "You will need others. Do not be as foolish as I was." Why would she need them? If they needed her help, she obviously did not need their help. It was annoying how easy their tasks had been and how long they took to complete them. Maybe she should take charge. Clearly, they shouldn't. Callady hadn't even noticed the light twirling in the meadow. That lack of attention to detail was inexcusable and may end up detrimental to the venture's success. Roan was content to let everyone contribute whenever, and that was bound to be a huge mistake as things got harder. It was easy to pick apart each team member and justify why maybe she should take over. She had easily gotten everyone across the bridge despite her mistake. She would be more vigilant in the future. They wouldn't have gotten across the bridge if she hadn't been there. Yes, she would take charge and ensure they were all taken care of. She felt her body tense at the pressure of being in charge, but it was the only way. Nobody else was capable. Breathing shaky, but knowing what had to be done, she almost rose to take charge. Something was nagging at her, so she remained seated to work it out. A question seemed to break through the haze of her mind. Why did you have to get everyone across by yourself? Because no one else was capable, she replied bitterly to herself. She almost believed it, but the nagging remained. Why did you have to get everyone across by yourself? Annoyed, she answered the question with more force. Because no one helped me. Why didn't they help you? Irate, because of the ignorance of the questions, she lashed back. Because they were lazy and stupid. They stood around laughing while I did all the work. Furious and hurt, she let the tears roll down her face. Embarrassed by her emotions, she saw everyone busily discussing the challenge. Grateful no one had noticed her weakness, she slipped off the log and sought the darkness of the woods. Far enough away that no one could hear her, but still able to see the fire, she let herself mourn. Stifling the sound of her sobs in her cloak, she let great waves of grief crash on her. She couldn't win. She wanted to be alone, but was lonely. She didn't want help, but didn't want to do everything alone. She felt she was the only one who could figure things out, but hated the pressure of it. She wanted to be happy like them, but was angry at how carefree they were about important things. They did not take things seriously enough. She knew she took them too seriously. Looking at the fire in the distance, she felt like an outsider again. She pulled her cloak in around her as she hugged her knees. She remembered the binding and how she fought to remove her cloak. Shame poured on her as she remembered she had been the last of all the teams. She laughed at herself. Moments before, she had thought she was the only one capable of leading the team. She wondered how long they had been waiting for her at the binding. Had they speculated on what was taking so long? Trying to rationalize her perceived deficit, she justified that they were mostly from Wisteria, and probably, like Calady, knew more because they had been raised there. Why had it taken her so much longer? Disgust and rage fought to come up first. It was infuriating to think that she had been last, that a group of imbeciles had figured out the binding before she had. They couldn't complete a basic pattern without making mistakes, but they figured out the binding first. It didn't make any sense. Why had each of them figured it out before she did? Hot shame flowed down her face. She groped in the dark to find the butterfly clasp and released it. She felt her cloak fall off her shoulders, and the cold, dark air filled its space. A weak little butterfly. She laughed. Of course. She had picked a symbol so fitting for her without even knowing she had picked it. Calady had chosen a yellow cloak with a sun that suited her. The sun had importance, worth. What worth did a measly butterfly have? If she had been smart enough to pay attention to the clasp, maybe she wouldn't have picked something so weak. What would she have picked? Her back against the tree behind her, she wondered if a tree had been an option. Was she more like a tree? Mocking herself, she laughed. Yes, stuck. A tree is fitting. But trees also grew, and she was too angry to connect with that. Was there a slug clasp? Her level of self-loathing made her laugh as she realized how foolish she sounded. Looking at the sky, she noticed all the colors had left, and the moonless night hung heavy in darkness. Just as well, she thought. Cold, she put her cloak back on, resenting the fact that she needed it. She wanted to remove it again. She didn't want to need anything or anyone. Her face was cold from the tears drying. Serves you right for your weakness. You have nothing to cry about, yet you miserably isolate yourself and wonder why you feel lonely. Knowing her pain was self-inflicted, but overwhelmed to know how to fix it, she continued in her misery. She was upset that the group needed help, but didn't want to help. She was angry they hadn't noticed she was missing, but glad they hadn't come looking for her. She hated how easy some things were for her and how hard other things were. Nothing made sense. She knew she should go back. It did no good to be out there by herself, and it would be embarrassing to return and not have helped when they figured it out. She would feel bad if someone was hurt because she hadn't helped. She thought of Rowan and Grade and how they helped the blue team. She knew that was why they couldn't help her, and it embarrassed her to realize she resented them for it. She couldn't make sense of anything she was doing. Why was she even there? Seriously, she should leave. She had felt so complete after the binding. It had been so hard and exhausting, but she felt more whole than ever. Why hadn't she left after the binding? What had happened after the binding to take away that wholeness? Which question should she look at first? She knew she hadn't left because she had felt complete and like she could do it. What happened? Too emotionally exhausted to feed the shame, she looked at the facts. She had resented their camaraderie and happiness, and though the group had tried to include her, she felt the distance between them was too great, and she ostracized herself. Trying to justify her right to be there, She had looked down on their efforts and further separated herself. She liked having Callie around, but was sure once Callie got to know her, she would not stay. These realizations humiliated her. In one day, she had shrugged off Aneth's advice, the completeness she had felt from the binding, and isolated herself from a group of potential friends. Maybe it was best. Maybe it was better to ruin it all before it got too far. She felt a fluttering in her chest. Placing her hand on the fluttering, she wondered what it was. Breathing slowly, she spoke to it. "What are you?" Not receiving an answer, but curious about what it meant, she asked again. "What are you?" Still no response. Thinking back to what she had been thinking about before she noticed the fluttering, she realized she had seen all the ways and reasons she had behaved poorly that day. The heaviness was not with it. She could just see why she had done each action. The fluttering increased. Curious, she looked at her actions and her motives further. Why did she feel she didn't belong? Everyone had been so kind. She had decided she didn't belong, not them. Why? She knew she was close to the answer and looked again at the pieces. Deep understanding pierced her and took her breath away as she realized she didn't want anyone to get to know her because she felt she would let them down. She had exhausted herself, trying to earn her father's and Palef's approval, and she could not face the effort it would take to please anyone else. Her mind took her to the cave. In the cave, she had forgotten how lonely and hard life was. She had forgotten how exhausting it was to please others. Her stomach didn't hurt in the cave. Her mind wasn't tortured with worries. She missed the cave. She missed him. Calling out to him, she felt him next to her. "I'm here, little one." Relief flooded her as she fought to know what question to ask him. Each question had too many others attached to it, so instead she said, "I am glad you're here." Warmth, like golden honey, poured over her troubled mind. Shrugging resignedly but calmly, she said, "Nothing seems as hard or scary when you are here." The golden honey rolled over her shoulders. Welcome tears seemed to pull the confusion and sorrow out of her heart. The knots in her stomach untwisted as the golden honey flowed through them. She only had one question to ask, but lacked the words to phrase it. Tears mixed with the start of words, but none conveyed what she was feeling, so she just whispered, "Please." The golden honey filled every part of her as she heard his answer, "Always."